BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm Alasdair Lamont. This is the Scottish Football Podcast. All the news, views and analysis you need on Monday the 7th of April. And it's been quite the weekend of football.
David Dickinson brings the game to a close. What a win for St Johnstone. What a result. No one, absolutely no one, would have predicted this outcome.
St Johnstone postponed Celtic celebrations and perhaps gave themselves a relegation lifeline. And that wasn't the only show in town on Sunday.
It's a straight red card for James Wilson. He was late, the boot was up, and he's off. It looked bad on first viewing.
Hearts lost out to Dundee United as teenage striker James Wilson saw red. And there was no shortage of drama on Saturday.
It's a goal. Martin Boyle was onside, and he has given Hibernian a 2-goal advantage. And Hibs go and celebrate with their fans, and well they might.
Hibs stunned Rangers, inflicting a record 5th home defeat in a row on the Ibrox side.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sport Scotland.
Well, I am joined for this Monday's podcast by Kevin Thomson, former Rangers and Hibs midfielder and a veteran of this podcast. How are you this late weekend evening, Kevin?
Yeah, all good, Al. All good.
Good show, rearing to go as always. And Stephen McGowan, also who is now with the Herald newspaper. And Stephen, I can't let you begin this podcast without mentioning your new title. I noticed at the Herald. Journalist at large. Is that a title you insisted upon before you signed that lucrative contract?
I just don't think they knew what to call me. As Tam Cowan put it, they should be calling me writer at larks. Because after a day like today, it was a day for a nice cone on the seafront, but I just don't think they knew what to call me. Simple as that.
Fair play. I sometimes don't know what to call you either, but it's usually an expletive or two in there. Anyway, not in this podcast though. Nowhere else to start but McDermott Park, where the real drama of Sunday happened. St Johnstone pulling off quite a sensational win over champions in waiting, Celtic. Kevin, I'll come to you first on this. It was really a performance that, I know St Johnstone have been at times decent under Simo Valakari, but this performance today seemed to me to almost come out of nowhere. What about your own take on it?
Yeah, I think since he's went in now, I think he's been positive. Listen, I think it's difficult when you base his style compared to who obviously followed and took the job on, totally different. And listen, I have nothing against either style. It's about winning games. Everybody's got their own ideas, but he has changed the narrative at McDermott Park. They try and play some football. They've maybe been punished off the back yet. But what a wonderful result for them against, no doubt, the champions to be. I know it's been put on ice a wee bit, but Celtic have been the best team. They're going to get what they deserve in the end. But what a wonderful 3 points. I'm just looking at the table there. It does make it really interesting at the bottom, doesn't it? We obviously the bottom 6 split to come, so it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds.
St Johnstone were brilliant. All over the pitch. I mean, there are absolutely no failures in that team today, Stephen. But defensively, keeper was terrific. Dealt with absolutely everything that was thrown his way. I thought the two centre backs as well. Obviously, Balodis gets the goal, and alongside him, Zach Mitchell was terrific as well. But just to a man, they were brilliant.
I think the goalkeeping signing has been the big one for them all. I think the first half of the season, had younger keepers in there who just never looked that convincing. I think if they brought Andy Fisher in sooner, they might have been in a better position now, actually. I think they were really dogged, resilient today. I think teams have worked out if you go with a low block against Celtic, you're going to give them problems. But it still needs organisation. Quite often, Celtic break you down at the end. They're just going to wear you down with their sheer energy. But that was never really there today. They were off it a bit. Still with 29 efforts in goal, 9 on target, I think it was. Couldn't score a goal. Very, very rare that happens to Celtic. But I think there's always a danger that we focus too much on Celtic and Rangers losing sometimes and not enough on the team that have won. Well, that shouldn't happen here. For St Johnstone, after Dundee and Kilmarnock winning yesterday, that was a huge win.
Totally. I mean, it does bring it, as you say, Kevin, it makes it interesting again because 8 points was just too big a gulf. 5 points, I was saying prior to today's kickoffs, or prior to the weekend's games, actually no team who's been 5 adrift at this stage has ever clawed it back, certainly in terms of when we've had 12 in the top flight. But you do feel that victory going into the final 6 games, it must give them a massive psychological boost that they can go and make that margin up.
Well, I don't think the games are easy, when you think obviously the 5 that follow the last one, the last round of games, then you've got your 5 bottom 6 ones that naturally you're playing against the teams over the course of the season that have not managed to squeeze into the top 6. So you could argue that their fixtures are slightly easier, albeit you're down there yourself. So they are obviously going to be really competitive. But I don't think, looking at the table, if it is going to end up the Jambos beat potentially St Mirren there, or whether Motherwell can potentially get that 3 points, whoever's going to steal that last position in the top 6, I think they can all beat each other. I genuinely do. I think St Johnstone are more than capable of picking up 7, 8, 9 points out of 15. I think the other 3 or 4 are more than capable as well. So I think if you're in that mix, you've got a wee bit squeaky bum time. And I think that result, as you mentioned, everybody was probably looking at St Johnstone thinking they're down and out. You're not expecting them to get anything off the champions-elect. They go and get 3 points, as you mentioned, the results that Kilmarnock picked up, Dundee picked up. A lot of teams, I think Motherwell have won 2 or 3 games in the last 12 or 13. So you could argue they're on a wee bit of a slippy slope. So that's all to play for.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Celtic, and often the focus is on maybe them being not at their best, Stephen, when they do lose. But we've given St Johnstone their moment of glory there. But we have to talk about Celtic because they weren't great. Has the edge just come off them because the title is such an inevitability, do you think?
Yeah, I think there is an element of that, Al. I think it's only natural, human nature, isn't it? I mean, we talk often about how flaky Rangers are. Well, actually, if you look at the stats, Celtic have become just as unreliable. I think like Rangers, they've lost 3 of their last 6 league games. They've now they've won 10 out of 20, is it 11 out of 24 points in the league since they turned the year away from home. Their domestic form in 2024 was impeccable. They only lost 1 game all year. Well, if you look at this calendar year so far, by April the 6th, they've already lost 4. So I don't think it's time to be ringing any crisis bells yet, but equally I think it does show that Celtic probably aren't as good a team as people thought they were. I think it also suggests that when push comes to shove, the lack of jeopardy in the league isn't really doing them any favours either. Because it's very difficult to keep your motivation high, keep your level high, if you know that even when you slip up, you're not going to be punished for it.
Yeah, they are still, Kevin, just to finish up on this game and finish up on Celtic for the moment. Heavy favourites to not only go on and take the title, but take the treble. But it does set up a very interesting Scottish Cup semi-final in a couple of weeks' time at Hampden against St Johnstone.
Certainly does. I don't think that Celtic will lose any psychological edge, that they've got the best players and they'll be massive favourites to obviously win that game in a few weeks' time. But if you ever needed a wee kick up the backside to keep at your energy levels and your quality levels, and I think what Stephen says there, I think it's hard to get bored winning. I genuinely do. I think the mentality of the team, and I'm sure there is people in there that will be frustrated that they're not keeping at the level, but there is the wee bit contradictory in me that thinks that when you're almost there, you're almost over the line, but they've got a treble to win. And I'm sure the narrative for the manager, the driving process every day, the standards every day will be on them. But you have to say, for an outside looking in, obviously the performances that we get to see, they've certainly fell off it. I think since Europe's kind of come to an end for them, it's almost been like, right, domestically we're probably going to win another treble, which is a sad indictment to everybody else, really.
I think after the game today as well, Kevin, I think the manager, Brendan Rodgers himself, said that he concerns about the level or the kind of mental attitude of some of the players about their ability to keep keep winning, just keep their motivation high. And I think it's something he's going to have to look at in the summer, because I think if you look, that's the last 9 away games for Celtic now, they've conceded a goal. As I say, we've talked a lot about Rangers losing a lot of goals, or losing two goals a game these days, but I think Celtic defensively as well are facing big question marks now, and the one thing they do have is they do have a big money pool pot to go in there and do something about it.
But after we caught our breath from McDermott Park, it was straight to Tynecastle, where Dundee United edged out 10-man Hearts to keep the Edinburgh side hanging on to the last weekend before the split to discover if they'll make the top 6. The game seemed to turn on the red card for James Wilson. It sounded like Hearts were the better team, Kevin, prior to that. But the going down to 10 men fairly early on maybe swung it in Dundee United's favour.
Listen, I've been impressed with the Jambos. I think they've. There's no doubt that everybody was scratching their heads a wee bit in the form of the Edinburgh clubs for the first quarter of the season. It was almost unthinkable the points return that they'd had for the both. I think 13 games in, 2 or 3 wins between the two of them. So for both teams to have turned that around, Neil Critchley and his staff deserve a lot of credit for that. I have to say, Jim Goodwin deserves a massive amount of credit. I watched him a lot in the Championship last year, and I thought they huffed and puffed, and I thought they struggled to go over the line. But to find themselves in the position and the points return that he's got this year, he's done a wonderful job up there. And I think both teams will end up in the top 6. As a Hibby, I wouldn't be too disappointed if the Jambos fail, but I think the Edinburgh Derby and obviously having the teams in there just makes it that wee bit more exciting for the top 6 split.
Stephen, Alan Preston was saying on Sports Sound that Neil Critchley is yet to win a big game for Hearts. Do you feel that is where they've fallen down ultimately this season?
So a narrative forming now, isn't it? I think the supporters are talking about the record in big games. I mean, the one thing that strikes me about all this is this week we've spent the entire time talking about league reconstruction, about the need to go to 14 or 16, or the need to not go to 10. And you look at this league now, Kevin was talking about it earlier, from 3rd to 12th, every team has an issue to play for. All right, maybe not at the top, but it's hard to see how that changes. But from Hibernian all the way down to St Johnstone, you've got issues, you've got excitement, you've got jeopardy. And you look at that Hearts game against Motherwell on the weekend. I mean, you could argue now that Celtic can't probably win the league. I think you would argue that is arguably the game of the weekend, even above Aberdeen Rangers, because that's going to be huge for both teams in terms of getting into that top 6 and the revenue that could potentially bring them.
What a signing Sam Dalby's been for Dundee United, Kevin. I mean, the fact that they're in the top 6, the defensive record's been pretty good, but Sam Dalby's goals have been invaluable, haven't they?
Yeah, he's been terrific. You think of Simon Murray, obviously at Dundee as well. There's a lot of good players out there that are potentially not. I'm not saying not the big clubs, but we always normally push towards like the Old Firm players scoring loads of goals and some of the records that they get to. But I think Dalby's been terrific. And when you think of Jim Goodwin, I think, and quote me if I'm wrong, I think when Hearts, Robbie Nielsen, I watched a lot of Hearts in the Championship when they got promoted. I think they ended up finishing 3rd or 4th. They got to Europe. Jim Goodwin's almost done the same with Dundee United. I thought they huffed and puffed to kind of have any real quality and any real stranglehold in the league, albeit they were going to win it in the end. But to bounce back up, I think I looked, they were on, is it right I'm saying 46, 47 points? Incredible return, really. Yeah. And well in the top 6 and obviously fighting for European football. So I think he's done a terrific job. And as you mentioned, the goals, naturally, you need to try and find that striker when you're kind of fighting against the rest to try and set yourself apart. And they've certainly found that in Dalby. And
it'll be a nervy last weekend before the split then for Hearts, Stephen, with 3 teams basically now in the mix for that one spot.
Absolutely. As I say, I think it's going to be a really cracking game against Motherwell. I mean, St Mirren are always there, aren't they, nipping away at their heels. Motherwell on 38 points of St Mirren. Even Kilmarnock, they can't make the top 6, obviously, but just so many issues. And as I say, I go back to that point where we're talking about changing the league. Well, actually, if you look at this league now, you're thinking, maybe it's not that broken. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe we should be looking at sticking with the devil we know rather than looking at change yet again.
Let's take a look back, though. Whistle-stop tour, perhaps, of Saturday's fixtures. And again, there's only one place to go to there. But I will start, rather than concentrate on Rangers' failings, I think we should talk about, Kevin, your other old team's positive run. I mean, 16 league games now, unbeaten. A first victory at Ibrox in many years. And you'd have to say it was deserved, wasn't it?
Yeah, listen, I think Dave and his staff, the players, deserve an enormous amount of credit. They've been a breath of fresh air. I think the key for Dave, or the confidence I'm sure he'll take, is that they've been well on top in games and won comfortably. They've also found themselves at different times where they've had to play with 10 men. They've maybe not so much through this run, but especially at the start of the season. So I think when you think of a camaraderie and a togetherness in the squad that can find different ways of either blowing teams away and scoring early and then keeping that run and holding it out, or potentially coming from behind and winning games. And And now when you kind of talk about the narrative that, Critchley's not winning big games, Dave Gray's winning big games for sure. And, he deserves a lot of credit, because I've got no doubt, without kind of putting it on him to ask if that was the case, but I'm sure he had a few sleepless nights when things weren't going so well. And when you think him as a manager now moving forward, he's probably never going to get as low as he was, apart from getting sacked, really. So I think it'll build up a lot of resilience in him as an individual, a lot of experience early on in his managerial career, and he's managed to come out the other side. So listen, as a friend of mine, obviously delighted. As a fellow Hibby as well, obviously I'm delighted to see them doing well.
I've mentioned this a few times to different people, Stephen, but I think credit has to go to the Hibs board, because they must have been tempted, as is often the way of things, to pull the plug on David Gray, an inexperienced manager for whom things seem to be going awry at the start of this season. But they stuck. For whatever reason, they decided they were going to stick with him, and it is paying dividends. It's good to see that, isn't it?
It's been a sliding doors moment, hasn't it? I mean, I keep going back to this night, the midweek game against Aberdeen, the Easter Road, where they were 3-2 down in the 95th minute, I think it was, and they come back, and I think Rocky Bushiri scores 6 minutes into added time, but they've never really looked back. To the point now where, incredibly, people are talking about David Gray as a potential manager of the year. Now, if Brendan Rodgers wins a treble, that's going to be a tricky old decision, and you could also say, well, does the first half of the season invalidate that a little bit? I don't think it does. I think he has pulled off a remarkable comeback. I think Hibs have been outstanding physically, mentally, technically. You're looking at players who, even without Nicky Cadden, who's been injured recently, who's only to come back now, who was such a key player to them, they've managed to adapt, they've managed to keep winning. And I think David Gray has to be a real contender for individual honours, as well as what his team are achieving collectively.
A quick word about Rangers, Kevin, because there's been many inquests over the course of the season. Barry Ferguson was very critical of his players, and you have to say he had every right to be. Yeah,
listen, I think you'll always get an honest answer, Al, off of Barry. I think he wears his heart on his sleeve. I think it's there for everybody to see. I think he's a winner. He's a mentality monster, and I think he'll find that difficult when that's maybe not reflected in his players and his team. He constantly, as it's a narrative that he uses, it's my players, it's my team, he's happy to take that mantle. But there's no doubt that losing 5 games in the bounce at Ibrox is unacceptable for any Rangers team, really. So I think that's the hard part to get away from it. There can't be any hiding place for it. Things need to get better. The narrative needs to change. The quality needs to get better. And I think it's okay to hold on to the fact that they've got a huge European game coming up. But I heard him say it. I listened to his interview. Bread and butter is winning games. And if opposition teams come to Ibrox and they think there's a bit of fear there's a bit of animosity, they breed on that. They live on it. That's what they want. That'll be a manager's team talk. I've been there. I've sat in the opposition changing room. Can you silence the crowd? Can you stay in the game? All those cliches that you can see. And unfortunately, for the last 4 or 5 games at home, the players unfortunately have not been able to handle that.
Yeah. You mentioned Simon Murray earlier. Let's move on to Dundee's win over St Mirren. He got a double in that one. And there's now, I've been hearing more and more people say, could he be a shout for a Scotland squad, a Scotland call-up? Kevin, would you be tempted to have him in a squad?
Listen, I've known Simon for a long time, and obviously watched his career at far. Delighted that I thought he was a real astute signing for Dundee. To think that he had scored, I think, 22, 23 goals in the previous season. For anyone to let him go, to end up potentially a rival or a team that might be fighting for the same kind of success as you. But I think he might have just been and gone. But listen, I'd be delighted to see him get that opportunity, no doubt about it. I've seen Tony Dock talking about him, and why not? You can only continue to do what he's doing for club and putting the ball in the back of the net. But I think he's probably a teammate's dream, Al. That's how I would describe him as a player. His work ethic, his endeavour, his personality. I've only met him a few times, obviously off the pitch, but people that I speak to seem to always think he's a brilliant character and a great teammate, and there's no doubt it's evident for us all to see how much work and effort he puts in for the team. So I've got no doubt he's a really highly appreciated teammate. A
very important one for Aberdeen at Ross County, given Hibs' result as well. Stephen, a terrific strike from Shaden Morris to win it. So they're very much still in contention for third place. Ross County, on the other hand, not a good time for them to hit a run of poor form, having lost 4 of the last 5.
No, Ross County, I think you were looking very much at Dundee and Kilmarnock being the teams who St Johnstone were looking to try and reel in a little bit. Well, the weekend's results have been pretty bad news for Ross County, obviously losing that game, because they now slipped down to 10th. They're right in the mix, right in the thick of it, and Aberdeen are right in the thick of it as well, because I think when they fell away, it's going to become one of the stories of the season. They had that fantastic start and then it all went so incredibly bad. Well, they seem to have steadied the ship a little bit. I think you're seeing Jimmy Tillman's new signings in January beginning to have a bit of an impact, and you'll be cautiously optimistic going into that game against Rangers at the weekend, certainly. They always get themselves up for that game. So yeah, I think worrying times for Ross County, a bit more optimistic for Aberdeen, but looking at that third place race, a few weeks ago, as Kevin was saying earlier, Dundee United were in a bad place, didn't look as if they were necessarily going to make the top six. That's a fascinating battle, isn't it?
Very much so. Let's just finish up our weekend look back with Kilmarnock. They certainly got a very important result as well, given the way things have been going for them with their 2-0 win over Motherwell. There was a controversial moment in that one, though, which may have proved pivotal. The red for Kofi Bammer. Kevin, I know that for a fact that in your day, that definitely wasn't a red. Is it? Is it nowadays?
Listen, I couldn't play now, Al, could I? It's I think when you see these types of tackles and you see these incidents happening, it's I suppose it's a frustration for me, really, because it's the narrative, or actually it's not the narrative, it's what's in the rules, it's the terminology that's used, and I think when referees see what they deem as the rule book, it's hard to get away from it. But I suppose a bit frustration, because you naturally want to see teams play with 11 men, you want to see the games as competitive as you can, but if you make mistakes, obviously, then naturally you get punished. And in the likelihood, there's not many teams domestically that can play with large spells of the game, down to 10 men and end up coming away with a positive result.
Yeah, we're over our time, I'm afraid, but I want to ask you very quickly, and we'll see if we can sneak this in at the end of the podcast. I just want each of you to tell me who you think will finish third, who'll get the last top six spot, and who will finish 11th and 12th. Kevin, you can go first.
I think the Jambos will squeeze into top six out, or stay in top six, sorry. I think St Johnstone will go down. Because obviously I've played for Dundee, I hope that they survive. But I would toss a coin really between Killie, Dundee and Ross County for that playoff spot. So it's kind of sitting on a three-way fence. And I think the Hibees will nick third.
That's a real surprise to hear you say that. Stephen, your very objective views on these things?
Hibernian for third, Hearts for sixth, or I wouldn't rule out St Mirren completely. Playoff spot, I think Ross County will slip into that, and I think St Johnstone will still go down just because they've got too much work to do. But you know what? Simo Valakari's getting a tune out of them, so this is when it gets to the tickly bit. It's getting a really exciting end to the season.
Oh, Stephen's answers were the same as mine there, and you never said that's a surprise to him.
He's just slightly less predictable. Anyway, no offence. That's all we've got time for. Many thanks to Stephen McGowan and Kevin Thomson. Thank you for listening. Remember, we're here with new episodes of the Scottish Football Podcast bright and early every day. So to make sure you don't miss out, subscribe on BBC Sounds and have push notifications turned on your phone. Bye for now.
For everything you need to know about your team this season, download the BBC Sport app. All the latest news, goal updates, stats and scores, and insight and analysis. Just select your club to get the biggest stories and best content at your fingertips. What a result. Download the BBC Sport app for everything you need to know about your team this season.